about the guilty plea or the charge implicates anyone other than Mr. Flynn. Good evening. Those are the words of White House lawyer Ty Cobb. Tonight, to the contrary, the many implications for current and former senior transition and administration officials of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's guilty plea in the Russia investigation. The many ways it suggests there may be far more to come, because he also agreed to cooperate with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The many ways it undermines virtually everything the president and his surrogates have been saying about Russia for month after month after month. The many ways it fills in pieces of a fact picture and a potentially very bleak picture for the White House, people close to the president, notably son-in-law Jared Kushner, and perhaps even for the president himself. Now, whatever comes to pass, what happened today, Flynn's admission that he'd lied to the FBI about contact with Russia's ambassador to the United States, and what's contained in the related court filing, it really moves the needle. It gives context to everything that we've learned so far. And keeping them honest tonight, it stands in sharp contrast to much of what the administration has been saying about Russia again and again and again.
The Russia story is a total fabrication. It's just an excuse for the greatest loss in the history of American politics.
Russia is a ruse. There is no collusion. You know why? Because I don't speak to Russians. This Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
The entire thing has been a witch hunt.
Look, there has been no obstruction. There has been no collusion.
All I can tell you is this. There was no collusion. There was no nothing.
Russia has 20% of our uranium. I think that's your Russia story. That's your real Russia story. Not a story where they talk about collusion and there was none.
Well, that has been the line, even as one revelation after another undermines it. First, with respect to contact during the campaign, some of which the guilty plea of George Papadopoulos revealed. He was derided as a mere coffee boy by people in the White House. However, former Lieutenant General, former Defense Intelligence Agency Director, former National Security Advisor to the President of the United States is no mere coffee boy. He was central to the campaign and central to the transition. Now, simply put, part of the very tight inner circle. A big fish, and now for Robert Mueller, a big catch. A big piece in this puzzle as well. With the information contained in Michael Flynn's plea, a window opens into contact with Russia during the transition, possibly illegal attempts to conduct foreign policy, and then lying about it during his brief tenure as National Security Advisor. Today's news also sheds new light on something fired Acting Attorney General Sally Yates said to me about the trip she made to the White House on the 26th of January to warn that General Flynn had lied about at least one Russian contact, was known to have lied, and was therefore potentially vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians.
When were you first made aware that General Flynn was lying about his interactions with the Russian ambassador?
Well, first let me say, and I know that this may seem kind of artificial to folks, I can't really talk about what General Flynn's underlying conduct was, because that's based on classified information.
Can you say when you were made aware about an issue with his underlying conduct?
It was in the early part of January where we first got some indication about what he had been involved in, and then sort of the middle part of January when there were false statements that started coming out of the White House based on misrepresentations he had made to people there.
She was fired 5 days after first warning the White House, and Flynn was allowed to stay on another 2 weeks, even though, as you just heard, the White House knew Flynn was lying about Russia contacts. Getting back to the underlying conduct, which Sally Yates declined to tell us about, it is now revealed in Robert Mueller's charging document today. It centers on late December. And before we dig deeper on that with our correspondents and our legal panel over the next hour, a reminder just of the context. This is happening weeks after the U.S. intelligence community warned that Russia had meddled in the election. And at the very same time that President Obama is sanctioning Russia for that meddling. Also, obviously, after the Trump Tower meeting, the Russia contacts by Carter Page and, now we know, George Papadopoulos. Additionally, it came after the contacts with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, during the Republican convention, after the early December meeting with Kislyak at Trump Tower, the one involving Flynn and Jared Kushner, at which Kushner asked about setting up a private communications channel between the transition team and the Kremlin. Now, in other words, what is described in the documents today transpired after many related developments and prior to many others, including the president allegedly asking James Comey to go easy on Flynn, his firing then of James Comey, his reported leaning on Republican lawmakers to end their own investigation, and of course, the naming of Robert Mueller. So, according to the charging document, on or about the 28th of December, as President Obama announces sanctions, Kislyak contacts Flynn. On or about the next day, Flynn contacts a senior transition official at Mar-a-Lago. We now know who she is. We'll have more on that shortly. Then he calls Kislyak and, according to the charging document, later lies about it to the FBI. The Russians, you'll recall, do not retaliate for the sanctions, which raised a lot of questions at the time. The 30th, President-elect Trump tweets, "Great move on delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart." Kellyanne Conway was at Mar-a-Lago when all this was going on, and her line, nothing was going on.
We've been talking about this for a while. I think that, all we heard all through the election was Russia, Russia, Russia. Whenever it came to anything Donald Trump said or did, it seemed most days. And now, since the election, it's just this fever pitch of accusations and insinuations. And we know why Hillary Clinton lost. I think the cues and clues are pretty obvious. They were obvious to us all along. They're very obvious to everyone now. And I don't believe Vladimir Putin deterred her from competing in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, states that Donald Trump carried for the first time as a Republican in decades.
So again, she said that on or around the very day we now know Flynn was talking to Russians and reporting back to Mar-a-Lago, where Kellyanne Conway did that interview. And just a couple weeks later on Face the Nation, here's what Vice President-elect Mike Pence said about Flynn's conversations with Kislyak.
It was strictly coincidental that they had a conversation. They did not discuss anything having to do with the United States' decision to expel diplomats or impose a censure against Russia.
Well, today's charging documents suggest clearly otherwise about that and about more. And even as the repercussions of this are just beginning, we're already learning more about the events described in them and the circumstances surrounding them.